The sound of rattling chains broke through the heavy air, followed by the sharp crack of a whip, and then silence. Under the burning Texas sun, a young woman stood barefoot on a wooden platform, her wrists bound with rusted iron cuffs. The crowd stared at her as if she were nothing more than livestock. The auctioneer wiped the sweat off his neck, his grin stretched thin. Though the war had ended 4 years ago and the law had declared freedom, in backwoods barns like this one, slavery still lived in the shadows. Hidden trades, quick money, and people treated like debts to be collected. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Next up, 17. No husband, no kin, the auctioneer called. Been sold 3 times already. Won't speak. Won't work. $5 to start. The crowd stayed quiet. A man in the front spat into the dirt. Ain't worth a dime, he muttered. Her name was Emily Carver. Her dress hung in torn strips. Dust caked on her skin. Her hair matted to her cheeks, hiding the bruise beneath her left eye. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, unmoving. She had long stopped crying. Crying didn't change anything here. Then a voice cut through the heat. Calm, deep, steady. I'll pay 20. Every head turned. At the back stood a man in a faded brown coat, hat low against the sun. He looked like someone who hadn't smiled in a decade. Samuel Harris, 56, gray stubble on his jaw, eyes like storm clouds. The auctioneer blinked. 20? You sure about that? Samuel nodded once. The gavel came down. Sold. Emily didn't move. She didn't even look at him. Samuel stepped forward, removing his hat as he saw her face clearly. And then his heart froze. That small crescent scar on her wrist. 8 years ago, he had wrapped that cut himself. He remembered the little girl who once hid behind her father's leg, asking if it would leave a mark. He had told her no. He had lied. The auctioneer shoved her toward him. Samuel caught her before she fell. Her skin was burning hot, her body trembling from exhaustion. For the first time, she looked up at him. Her eyes, green, dull, and hollow, met his. He whispered her name. Emily. Her expression didn't change. For a brief second, something flickered in her gaze. A flash of memory from before the war burned everything down. But she buried it quick. In her world, remembering faces was dangerous. Trust got people killed. She didn't remember him. Or maybe she did, and wished she didn't. Samuel handed over the last of his crumpled bills, the weight of his guilt heavier than the heat pressing down on them. As the barn door slammed behind him, the sound of the gavel echoed again. Another life sold. Another soul gone. Outside, the dirt road shimmered under the blazing sky. Emily walked a few steps behind him, her chains clinking softly. Each sound hit Samuel like a hammer. Every step reminded him of what he owed. He didn't know if she'd ever understand why he did this. Maybe she never would. But he couldn't leave her there to rot in that place. 8 years ago, his father's greed had destroyed her family, burned their land, took their lives. And now the last piece of that family followed him in silence, broken but alive. The sun dipped lower as they walked. Dust rose around their boots. Samuel knew he could never undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could face it. Forgiveness wasn't what he was after. He just wanted her to have a chance to breathe free air again. They reached his horses tied behind the barn. He pulled a small key from his pocket, unlocking the chains around her wrists. No one should wear these in a free country, he muttered. Emily rubbed her raw wrists, eyes narrowing, still saying nothing. She didn't thank him. She didn't trust him. She just stared at the dirt road stretching ahead, endless and cruel, like the life she'd known. Samuel climbed onto his horse. Come on, he said quietly. Emily hesitated, then mounted the smaller mare behind him. The two rode out into the dying light, a broken man and a girl who'd forgotten how to hope. The road stretched far into the horizon, silent except for the clink of loose iron and the slow beat of hoofs. Neither spoke. The wind carried dust and the smell of ash from a war that never really ended. Samuel glanced back once. She didn't meet his eyes. He turned forward again, jaw tight. He didn't know if he'd done the right thing. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her behind. And maybe that was enough for now. The road stretched under a merciless sun, dry and endless. Dust rose behind them, blurring the trail back to the barn. Samuel rode in silence. Every sound, the creak of leather, the jingle of chains, the steady rhythm of hooves, echoing in his chest like a heartbeat he didn't trust anymore. Emily followed on the smaller mare a few paces behind, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the ground. She hadn't said a single word since he bought her. After a while, Samuel slowed his horse near a wide oak tree, the only patch of shade for miles. He dismounted and tied the reins. Pulling a dented canteen from his saddlebag, he walked toward her. "Here," he said softly, holding it out. She hesitated, staring at the canteen like it might be a trick. Her lips were cracked, her face flushed from the heat, but her pride was sharper than thirst. For a moment, Samuel thought she might spit at him. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling as she took it. She drank one careful sip, then wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. Her eyes lifted, sharp and green, cutting right through him. "Guess you got what you paid for," she said quietly. "Do what you want." Samuel's stomach twisted. He didn't answer right away. The words hit harder than any bullet he'd ever faced. He knelt, careful to keep his hands visible. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said. His voice was low, steady, almost pleading. "I just couldn't watch them sell you again." Emily let out a small, bitter laugh, dry and hollow. "You think that makes it better?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no answer that wouldn't sound wrong. For a long while, they said nothing. Only the wind moved, whispering through the dry grass. Samuel sat down on a flat rock and stared at his boots. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of everything he hadn't said. "I knew your family," he said finally. His voice was rough. "Your father was a good man. I should have done more when they came for him." Emily turned her face away. Her jaw tightened. Everybody says that, after it's too late. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain that never came. She stood, handed the canteen back, and walked toward her horse. Samuel didn't stop her. He watched her shoulders, small, tense, still carrying too many ghosts for someone her age. He put his hat back on and followed her lead. They rode for hours without speaking, the air heavy with unspoken truth. Samuel's mind kept replaying that night 8 years ago. The fire, the screams, the sound of soldiers shouting his family name. His father had called it business. Samuel called it sin. He'd been a coward then, and every day since, he'd carried that shame like a brand across his heart. Buying Emily hadn't erased it. It had only brought it back to life. When the sun began to sink, painting the sky in blood-red streaks, they reached a narrow creek. Samuel stopped, climbed down, and helped her off the horse, though she refused his hand. They made camp beneath a cluster of cottonwoods. He built a small fire, the crackling wood filling the silence between them. Emily sat on the other side, knees pulled to her chest, staring into the flames. Her eyes caught the light, and for a moment, Samuel saw not the hollow girl from the auction, but the child she'd once been, the one who'd run barefoot through her family's fields before soldiers burned them to ash. "You can rest tonight," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we'll reach my ranch. You'll have a bed, food, whatever you need." Her voice came out soft but cold. "And then what? You expect me to thank you?" Samuel's eyes dropped to the fire. "No," he said. "I just don't want you to be afraid anymore." She scoffed. "People like me don't get to stop being afraid." For a second, he wanted to tell her everything. The truth about his father, the guilt, the reason he'd come for her. But the words lodged in his throat. She wasn't ready to hear them, and he wasn't ready to say them. Instead, he said, "You should eat something." He handed her a small piece of bread from his pack. Emily took it without looking at him. She chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving the fire. When the flames burned low, she lay down with her back to him, her chains clinking softly. Samuel sat awake for a long time, staring at the stars above. Each one reminded him of the people he couldn't save. He wanted to believe that rescuing her meant something. But deep down, he knew he hadn't done it for her. He'd done it for himself. And that was the part that hurt the most. By the time the sun climbed over the hills, the world had turned to gold and dust. Samuel had barely slept. He'd sat through the night, listening to the faint rustle of Emily shifting in her sleep, the clink of the chain still wrapped loosely around her wrist. When dawn came, she was already awake, sitting by the cold ashes of the fire. Her eyes looked clearer in the morning light, but not softer. They packed up in silence and rode west toward the ranch. The land stretched wide and empty, scattered with scrub and the occasional hawk circling overhead. The only sounds were the horse's hooves and the faint rattle of Samuel's guilt in his chest. By mid-afternoon, the fence line of his ranch came into view, weathered posts leaning from age, a windmill creaking slow and tired. Beyond it stood a small cabin, plain but sturdy, surrounded by acres of dry grass that shimmered in the heat. Samuel climbed down first, then turned toward Emily. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's safe." She looked around, eyes narrow. Safe's a word men like to say when they mean trapped. He wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. For someone who'd been owned, every wall looked like a cage. Inside the cabin, Samuel showed her the single bed and a cold stove. "There's bread in the tin and water in the barrel," he said. "You can rest. I'll be outside fixing the corral." Emily didn't answer. She stepped in slow, careful, like a stray dog testing the floorboards. The door creaked shut behind her, and for the first time since the auction, Samuel felt the quiet wrap around him like a punishment. Days passed. They didn't speak much, but she worked hard. She scrubbed the floor until her hands cracked, carried buckets of water from the well, and fed the horses without being asked. Samuel mended fences, fixed the roof, and tried not to watch her too closely. They moved through each day like two ghosts haunting the same piece of land. But peace never lasted long out here. On the third day, Samuel noticed dust rising on the horizon. 3 riders were coming fast. He squinted against the sun, his hand drifting toward the gun at his hip. When they drew closer, he saw the glint of a badge. Sheriff Coleman, the man who'd once called himself a protector of justice, but whose justice had burned the Carver farm to the ground. Samuel's stomach turned. The sheriff dismounted slow, boots crunching on dry dirt. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, smirking. "Samuel Harris. Heard you'd gone quiet these last few years." Samuel didn't answer. He stood firm, body still, eyes watching the sheriff's every move. Coleman's gaze slid past him to where Emily was standing near the fence, her hands gripping the rail. He squinted, his smile fading when he saw the small scar on her wrist. "Now that's a face I didn't think I'd see again," he said, voice low. Emily froze. Her knuckles whitened around the wood. Samuel stepped between them. "You've had your look," he said. Coleman tilted his head, amused. "Buying lost girls now, are you, Sam? Or is she here to keep your bed warm?" Samuel didn't flinch, but the air around them changed. The kind of silence that came before a gunshot. "I paid for her freedom," Samuel said, his voice low and steady. "Not her body." The sheriff chuckled. "That's mighty noble of you. But I remember that name, Carver. Her daddy was a traitor, wasn't he?" Samuel's fists clenched. He remembered the lie all too well. The story Coleman had spun to justify taking their land, killing her family, calling honest folks enemies of the Union. Emily's breath caught. The color drained from her face, but she didn't speak. She'd learned long ago that silence could save her life. Samuel's voice came out hard. "She's under my protection." Coleman stepped closer, pulling a single bullet from his pocket. He placed it on the fence post between them. "Consider this a reminder," he said softly. "Some ghosts don't stay buried." He swung back onto his horse and rode off, the other riders following. Dust rose in their wake, thick and heavy. Emily picked up the bullet, turning it in her hand. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. Samuel looked at the horizon, the sky burning orange. "Not someone you want to remember." Her eyes searched his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. But Samuel turned away, jaw tight, shoulders heavy with a truth he wasn't ready to share. He knew one thing, though: the past wasn't done with either of them. And when Coleman came back, he'd bring hell with him. That night, the wind howled across the ranch, carrying the scent of old smoke and rain that never fell. Emily sat by the window, staring out into the darkness. Samuel sat by the fire, his gun on the table, the weight of that single bullet sitting between them like a curse neither could forget. The night after the sheriff's visit felt longer than any Samuel could remember. Wind pushed against the cabin walls, making them groan like old bones. The fire burned low, its light throwing restless shadows across Emily's face. She sat near the hearth, knees tucked to her chest, her eyes half hidden behind strands of hair that had fallen loose. She hadn't spoken since Coleman left. Samuel sat on the other side of the fire, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames like he could burn away the past. He could still hear the sheriff's voice, smooth and cruel, dragging ghosts back to life. After a long silence, Emily reached into her pocket. Her hand shook a little. She set something small on the table between them. The faint glow from the fire caught on silver metal, a pocket watch, old and worn. "You recognize it?" she asked softly. Samuel froze. He didn't need to touch it to know what it was. The initials RC were faintly carved on the back. Robert Carver, her father. "I found it after the raid," she said. "It was in a bag they left behind. I've kept it 8 years. Every time they sold me to another house, I made sure no one ever took it." Her voice trembled, though she fought to keep it steady. "It was the last thing he gave me before the soldiers came. He said, 'Keep this safe, Emily.' So I did." She looked straight at him, her eyes sharp but wet. "You knew him, didn't you?" Samuel swallowed hard. He wanted to look away, but her gaze pinned him down like a truth he couldn't outrun. "I did," he said quietly. "Then tell me what happened that night." He didn't answer right away. The fire crackled between them, each pop of the wood sounding like gunfire from the past. He rubbed his palms together slowly, feeling the grit of old guilt. "My father," he began, voice low and rough, "sold out your family after the war. Said it was business. He told the soldiers your pa was hiding rebel gold. I overheard him try to warn your folks, but by the time I got there, everything was burning." Emily's face went pale, her lips trembling. "You were there." "I was," Samuel whispered. "I saw the flames. I saw your father on the porch, trying to get his wife and little girl out. I should have gone to him, but I froze. I was a coward. I lived and they didn't." She stared at him, her breathing unsteady. Then she stood, pushing away from the fire so suddenly that the stool clattered against the floor. "So you're the son of the man who killed my family," she said. The words came out sharp, shaking. "And you think by me makes it right?" Samuel stood too, his hands open at his sides. "No," he said, voice breaking. "Nothing makes it right. I didn't buy you to fix the past. I just couldn't let them hurt you again." Emily's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You should have left me there," she said, whispering like a hurt to speak. "At least there I knew what I was." Her words sliced through him. He wanted to reach out, to tell her she was wrong, but his hand hung useless in the air. "Emily," he said softly, "I can't undo what happened, but you deserve to know who you're standing next to." She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as a reminder of everything she'd lost. Then she picked up the pocket watch and clutched it tight. "You think telling me this makes it better?" she asked. "No," he said. "It just makes it honest." For a moment, the only sound was the fire breathing between them. Then thunder rolled over the hills, deep and distant. The rain began, slow at first, then heavy, drumming against the roof. Emily sank back onto the chair, her shoulders shaking. She turned the watch in her hands again and again, like she could find answers in the scratches. Finally, her voice came out small, almost broken. "If your father did all that," she whispered, "why are you the one carrying the guilt?" Samuel looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "Because I was there. Because I did nothing. And because I'm still breathing when they're not." The storm outside grew louder, wind slamming against the windows. Emily stared at him, her face softening, not in forgiveness, but in something close to understanding. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind that didn't feel empty anymore, the kind that held too much between two people who didn't know what to do with it. When the fire began to die, Samuel leaned back, his voice barely above the rain. "You don't have to forgive me," he said. "I just want you to have the choice." Emily didn't respond. She just held the watch close to her chest and closed her eyes. Outside, Thunder rolled one last time, echoing through the valley like a memory that refused to fade. Inside, the two of them sat across from each other. Two survivors, bound not by chains, but by the ghosts of a single night that had stolen everything. And though neither said it, they both knew something had shifted. The hatred in her eyes wasn't gone, but for the first time, it wasn't the only thing there. The storm rolled out by dawn, leaving the land washed clean and quiet. The air smelled like wet earth and ash, a mix of things dying and things trying to live again. Samuel stood outside, boots sinking slightly in the mud, fixing the fence the wind had torn loose overnight. His hands were steady, but his mind wasn't. He could still see Emily's face from last night, those eyes that looked at him not with hatred, not exactly, but with something that hurt worse, confusion. He'd given her the truth, and sometimes the truth wasn't a cure, it was another kind of wound. From a cabin, he heard soft footsteps. Emily's voice came, dry and quiet, like she hadn't spoken in years. "You're doing it wrong." Samuel turned, surprised. She was standing at the fence line, holding the hammer he'd dropped earlier. Her hair was messy, still damp from the rain, and her dress clung to her like it didn't fit the world she was standing in. "Oh yeah," he said, half smiling. "Been a while since someone told me that." She didn't smile back, but she walked closer, took the post from his hand, and began to fit it into the hole herself. "You're supposed to angle it. Wind breaks easier that way." He watched her work, silent. There was something about her now, something alive. Not the quiet, empty girl from the auction, but someone who remembered how to stand up straight. They worked side by side for hours, saying little. Just the sound of wood hitting dirt, nails sinking in, the creak of the windmill in the distance. It was the kind of silence that didn't hurt. At one point, Samuel passed her a board, and their fingers brushed. She froze, like she wasn't used to touch that wasn't meant to hurt. He felt her hand flinch, then settle. Neither said a word, but something small and fragile shifted between them. When the fence was done, Emily wiped the sweat from her brow and looked toward the horizon. The clouds had cleared, the sun soft and forgiving for once. "Never thought I'd see a sky like that again," she said. Samuel followed her gaze. "Funny thing about the sky," he murmured. "No matter how many fires we start down here, it still looks the same." She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "You talk like a man who's trying to make peace with ghosts." He gave a small, tired laugh. "That's exactly what I am." They walked back to the cabin. Samuel set 2 mugs on the table and poured the last of the coffee. It was bitter and thin, but it felt like something shared. Emily sat across from him, cradling the cup in her hands, watching the steam rise. "You could have lied," she said suddenly. He looked up. "About what?" "About that night. About your father. Most men would have." Samuel shrugged. "Maybe I was tired of pretending to be better than I am." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "My father used to say, truth's like fire. It burns what it touches, but it also gives light." He nodded. He was a wise man. A small smile touched her lips, barely there but real. "He was. You remind me of him sometimes." Not the face, but the quiet. Something inside Samuel loosened. He didn't know what to say, so he just sat there, letting the silence speak for both of them. Later that evening, he went out to the field again, carrying 2 small wooden boards. Emily followed him, curiosity tugging her steps. He knelt by the fence line and began carving names into the wood with his knife, slow, careful letters. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Something I should have done years ago," he said. When he finished, he stood and stepped back. There, beside the old oak, were 2 wooden crosses. One read Robert Carver, and the other simply said family. Emily's eyes filled before she could stop them. She knelt beside the crosses, tracing the carved letters with her fingers. Her breath hitched once, then steadied. After a long while, she stood and looked at Samuel. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the silver watch, and pressed it into his hand. "I think it belongs here," she said. He shook his head. "No, it's yours." Her lips curved in a small, tired smile. "Then let it stay with them." Samuel nodded, burying the watch between the crosses. The metal glinted once before the dirt covered it, catching the last light of the day. That night, Emily didn't sleep in the corner near the door. She sat by the window instead, watching the stars scatter across the dark. Samuel sat on the other side of the room, eyes on the same sky, feeling, for the first time in years, like he could breathe again. Outside, the world was still scarred, still rough. But in that quiet cabin, two broken people had found something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the start of it. Sometimes, healing didn't come all at once. Sometimes it came slow, like grass pushing through burned soil, quiet, stubborn, and alive. For nearly a week, the ranch felt calm, a strange, fragile kind of calm that Samuel hadn't known in years. The days moved slow. Emily helped with the horses, mended old clothes, and learned how to fix a fence without splintering her hands. At night, they shared quiet meals, not talking much, but the silence no longer cut like it used to. It just existed between them, gentle, familiar. One evening, Samuel found her standing by the corral, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. Her hair caught the light like fire, and for the first time, he realized how young she really was, barely more than a child when the world had taken everything from her. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "All the time," she said. "But then I remember, I don't even know where I'd go." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes staying put is the hardest kind of freedom." She gave a soft laugh. "That sounds like something an old man says when he's tired of running." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it is." She looked at him, then really looked. "You don't sleep much, do you?" "Not when the past keeps talking." Emily's eyes softened. She didn't press him further. Instead, she reached down and scooped a handful of dirt, letting it fall through her fingers. "You think ghosts ever get tired of following us?" "Only when we stop giving them reasons to." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain again, but this time it wasn't from the sky. It was coming from the east, where dust was rising fast. Samuel turned, his gut tightening. He knew that kind of dust, the kind that came with horses. Emily saw his face change. "What is it?" "Get inside," he said. She didn't argue. Moments later, 3 riders appeared over the ridge. Sheriff Coleman was in front. The other 2 looked meaner this time, one with a scar down his cheek, the other carrying a rifle across his saddle. They rode straight up to the corral. "Well, Sam," Coleman said, dismounting, "you sure know how to keep a secret." His eyes found Emily near the porch. "Didn't expect you'd have the guts to keep her." Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm but iron hard. "She's not yours to find." Coleman smirked. "Everything out here's mine if I want it bad enough." The 2 deputies shifted in their saddles. The one with the scar spit into the dirt. "Heard that girl's got a bounty on her name," he said. "Something about her daddy being a traitor." "That's a lie and you know it," Samuel snapped. Coleman raised a brow. "Maybe, but lies pay better than truth these days." He walked toward the porch, boots dragging slow through the dust. "So here's how it goes. You hand her over, no trouble. Or we take her, and trouble follows." Emily's breath caught. She stood in the doorway, shaking but still standing. Samuel saw her eyes, wide, terrified but fierce. He took one slow step forward, his hand resting near his gun. "You take one more step toward her," he said, "and you'll find out what kind of man I used to be." The air went still. Even the horses stopped moving. Coleman's smile faltered, just a little. Then he nodded toward the scarred deputy. "You sure you want to draw on a sheriff, Sam?" Samuel didn't blink. "Wouldn't be the first time I did something I couldn't take back." The standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Then Coleman laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "You've changed, Harris. Used to be you'd hide behind your daddy's name. Guess guilt makes a man grow a backbone." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out something small and shiny, another bullet. He set on the fence post just like before. "You keep forgetting, Sam," he said softly. "Some debts don't wash away with rain." Then he swung up on his horse. "We'll be back," he said, tipping his hat toward Emily. "Next time, we don't talk first." They rode off into the setting sun, leaving dust and silence in their wake. Samuel stayed where he was, staring at that bullet glinting in the last light. Emily stepped out slowly, her voice trembling. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No," Samuel said. "He's not." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Then what do we do?" He looked at her, the wind tugging at his coat. "We get ready." That night, neither of them slept. Samuel cleaned his old rifle while Emily sat near the window, watching the road disappear into darkness. She wanted to ask him what kind of man he used to be, but part of her already knew. And somewhere deep inside, where anger and fear had lived for too long, something else began to stir. Not hate, not yet forgiveness, but the small, dangerous spark of courage. Because this time, she wasn't planning on being the one who ran. The next morning came cold, gray, and too quiet. The sky felt heavy, like the land itself was waiting for something ugly to happen. Samuel stood on the porch, the old rifle resting in his hands. He'd oiled it, cleaned it, loaded it, but still it felt like holding history, not protection. Every part of him knew what was coming. Inside, Emily moved about the cabin in silence. She had braided her hair back, rolled up her sleeves, and looked nothing like the broken girl he had found at that auction. Her face was different now. Still young, still scarred, but full of something new. Purpose. Samuel turned when she stepped out onto the porch. "You should stay inside when they come," he said quietly. "I'm not hiding," she replied. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Emily, this isn't your fight." She looked at him, her voice calm but fierce. "It became my fight the night they took my family. You just didn't see me then." He wanted to argue, but there was no point. She had that look, the same one her father used to have when he refused to bow his head. Samuel had seen it before the fire took everything. The morning stretched into afternoon. Hours crawled by, thick with waiting. Every sound, the creak of the barn door, the flap of a loose shutter, made them both look up, tense. By the time the sun started to dip, Samuel saw them. 3 riders, the same dust cloud, same formation. Sheriff Coleman led the way. "They're here," Samuel said. Emily didn't flinch. "Then let's finish this." He turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "You listen to me. If things go bad, you run for the tree line. Don't look back." She shook her head. "Not this time." He almost smiled, sad, proud, afraid all at once. "You sound like him," he said softly. "Then maybe you finally understand what he died for." Coleman's voice broke the stillness as he rode closer. "Afternoon, Sam," he called, that mocking drawl slicing through the wind. "Figured we'd stop by for that girl you've been keeping." Samuel stepped off the porch, gun at his side but not raised. "She's not yours." Coleman smirked. "Oh, everything's someone's. Depends who's willing to take it." Emily stood behind him now, her hands trembling, but not from fear, from fury. Coleman noticed and grinned wider. "Well, look at that. Little Carver's grown claws." "Don't," Samuel warned. But Coleman wasn't the kind to stop. He dismounted, his boots crunching slow and deliberate over the dirt. "You know, Sam, when we burned that farm, I thought we were doing the law's work. Guess that makes you the son of a good man gone bad. Like father, like son." Something broke inside Samuel. He raised a rifle, voice shaking. "You speak his name again, I'll drop you right here." Coleman's smile faded. "Then do it." For a long moment, the world held its breath. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then a shot cracked the air, loud, sharp, final. But it wasn't Samuel who fired. Coleman staggered, looking down at his chest where the bullet had torn through. His knees buckled. He fell hard, the dust rising around him. Emily stood behind Samuel, her hands gripping his revolver. Smoke curled from the barrel. For a second, neither of them moved. The deputies froze in shock, then bolted, kicking their horses into a frantic gallop, disappearing into the canyon dust. Samuel turned, eyes wide. Emily. Her hand was still shaking, her breath ragged. "He was gonna kill you," she whispered. "He was gonna kill us both." He stepped closer, gently prying the gun from her trembling fingers. "I know," he said softly. "It's over now." But she shook her head. "It's never over. You said it yourself. Ghosts don't stay buried." He looked at Coleman's still body, the sheriff's badge glinting dull in the fading sun. "Maybe this one will." Emily's chest rose and fell fast. Tears streaked down her cheeks, though her face stayed hard. "I didn't mean to," she started, her voice breaking. He kept talking like we were nothing." Samuel reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "He got what he gave. Don't let it take more from you." For a long while, neither spoke. The air smelled of gunpowder and dust, and the faint sweetness of sage from somewhere far away. Finally, Emily looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You think God forgives people like us?" Samuel's answer came slow. "Maybe not right away, but he gives us time to try." As the sun sank behind the hills, Samuel covered Coleman's body with his coat. There'd be questions later, maybe more men coming. But right now, there was only the two of them, the quiet, and the long road that waited for whatever came next. Emily stood beside him, small against the vast sky, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes steady now. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was standing. Samuel looked at her, his voice low. "You did what you had to." She nodded. "So did you." And together, under the darkening Texas sky, they started walking back toward the cabin, not as a man and a girl bound by the past, but as two souls who had finally stopped running from it. By the next morning, the storm inside and out had finally quieted. The sky was pale blue, the kind that only came after a night of thunder and loss. The air was clean, and the land seemed to breathe again. Coleman's body was gone, buried under the old oak tree at the edge of the field. No markers, no words, just a pile of stones and a silence that fit him better than any prayer ever could. Samuel stood there for a while, hat in hand, the wind brushing through his gray hair. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The earth had already taken what it was owed. Behind him, Emily walked up, her steps slow but sure. She looked down at the stones, then at Samuel. "You think anyone will come looking for him?" He shook his head. "Men like him don't get looked for. They just get replaced." She nodded, eyes steady. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped replacing them." He smiled a little, tired, proud. "Maybe that someone's you." They walked back toward the cabin. The day felt new, the kind of new that hurt but also promised something, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Inside, Samuel poured coffee into 2 tin cups, and they sat at the small wooden table, the same one that had held so many silences before. This one felt different. Emily stared out the window, watching the sunlight pour over the fields. "You think I did the right thing?" she asked softly. Samuel leaned back, his eyes on her, calm and thoughtful. "I think you did what the world forced you to. And sometimes that's the only choice we get." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a voice that barely rose above the wind, she said, "I don't want to be angry forever." He nodded slowly. "Good. Anger's heavy. You can't carry it and move forward at the same time." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You sound like someone who's been trying to drop that weight a long time." "I have," he admitted. "And today, I think I finally did." They went outside after breakfast, the land still damp from yesterday's rain. Samuel fixed the gate, while Emily knelt by the crosses near the fence. The wooden markers stood firm now, the names carved deep and clean. She brushed the dirt from them gently, like she was touching something sacred. "I used to think forgiveness was just a word," she said, not turning around. "Something people said when they were too tired to keep fighting." But now, she paused, her fingers tracing her father's name. Maybe it's not about forgetting. Maybe it's just about not letting the pain decide who you are anymore. Samuel stopped working, his throat tight. "Your father would have said the same thing," he murmured. She turned, smiling through wet eyes. "Then maybe I'm finally listening." The afternoon stretched soft and warm. The ranch looked almost alive again, birds fluttering near the well, sunlight glinting off the water trough, the world rebuilding itself one quiet breath at a time. That evening, Samuel sat on the porch with his boots propped against the railing, watching Emily feed the horses. Her laugh, small, unsteady, but real, drifted through the air. It hit him like a blessing. He hadn't known what saving her would bring. Maybe he had thought it would erase something inside him, balance out a sin he could never name aloud. But now he understood this wasn't about redemption. It was about letting another soul keep living when his had already spent too long dying. As the sun dipped low and painted the world in gold, Emily came up to the porch. She handed him a folded piece of cloth. Inside was the silver watch. "I thought you left that with them," he said. "I did," she replied, "but I dug it back up. I think it's time it kept ticking again." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then maybe we both get to start over. She smiled, tired and soft. Yeah, maybe we do. They sat there as night settled in, side by side, saying nothing. The stars came out, scattered and bright, the same ones that had watched them through every fire, every storm, every hard mile. And in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them, a kind of peace that didn't erase the past, but finally made room for the future. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't a word you say to someone else. It's something you learn to whisper to yourself. Sparkle's moral lesson. No one can change the past, but we can choose what kind of people we become after it. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the weight of what was done to you and what you did to survive.